We're diving into 15 dangerous engines no longer built today, motors that earned such notorious reputations for catastrophic failures, spontaneous combustion, and wallet-destroying repairs that manufacturers had no choice but to pull the plug. Think your old outboard just needs a tune-up? Wait until you hear about the Evinrude Ficht that could literally blow a hole through your transom. But here's the twist. Some of these supposedly dangerous engines were actually revolutionary designs, victims of rushed production and corporate greed rather than bad engineering. What killed these motors wasn't their danger to boaters, but their danger to the bottom line of marine manufacturers who couldn't afford the lawsuits. Let's start with the engine that's become synonymous with marine mechanical disaster, the Evinrude Ficht. Introduced in 1997, this direct fuel injection two-stroke was supposed to be Evinrude's answer to stricter emissions regulations. The name Ficht came from the German company that developed the technology, which should have been our first warning sign. The Ficht promised better fuel economy and cleaner emissions. What it delivered was corporate destruction. The engine suffered from catastrophic EMM, engine management module failures, without warning. 1 minute you're cruising, the next your engine goes full throttle regardless of controls. Imagine trying to dock when it decides to recreate Miami Vice. The Ficht would hydrolock when fuel accumulated in the crankcase, causing internal explosions. Forum posts described transoms being blown apart and repair bills exceeding the boat's value. One owner on the Hull Truth said his Ficht ran great, right up until it grenaded itself 50 miles offshore. OMC stopped producing these when they went bankrupt in 2000. Force outboards were Mercury Marine's attempt at creating a budget-friendly line in the 1980s after acquiring Chrysler's marine division. The idea: take Chrysler's existing designs, slap a new name on them, and sell them as entry-level motors. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Force outboards developed a reputation for spontaneous self-destruction. The engines used inferior metallurgy that would cause cylinder walls to score after minimal use. The electrical systems were clearly designed by someone who learned wiring from horror movies. Random shorts, melting harnesses, and inexplicable failures were standard features. But the real speciality was throwing rods through the block with absolutely no warning. 1 minute you're puttering along, the next you're looking at a new viewing window into your engine's internals. The connecting rods were seemingly made from compressed disappointment. Production mercifully ended in 1999, though Mercury tried keeping the brand alive briefly as Force by Mercury. It was like putting lipstick on a pig that was actively on fire. Before we continue on our countdown of maritime mechanical mayhem, if you're enjoying this deep dive into boating's most notorious power plants, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Before the infamous 800 series, OMC's Stringer 400-440 sterndrive systems from the late 1960s through 1970s were already perfecting marine mechanical misery. These intermediate-sized Stringers offered more power options, but what they really offered was more ways for catastrophic failure. The 400-440 series had an intermediate housing seemingly designed using Play-Doh as the prototype material. The housing would develop cracks around the bearing carrier with such consistency that mechanics started pre-ordering replacement parts when they saw one coming. When these housings failed, they announced it with grinding sounds that could wake the dead and metal shavings that turned your gear oil into glitter soup. The electric shift assistance was like having a teenager help you dock. Sometimes it did the exact opposite. One owner on Classic Marine Engine Forum described his 440 as having the reliability of a chocolate anchor and the repair costs of a yacht. These motors were discontinued in the early 1980s. Before force became the joke of the marine world, there was Chrysler Marine. These engines, built from the 1960s through the early 1980s, were so spectacularly unreliable they made British Leyland cars look dependable. Chrysler outboards had this delightful feature where the powerhead would separate from the midsection while running, not gradually, not with warning, just sudden, violent separation like a bad divorce. The mounting bolts were torqued to suggestion rather than specification, and gaskets were made from materials that dissolved faster than Alka-Seltzer in salt water. The ignition systems were powered by wishful thinking, with points that needed adjustment every time you looked at them wrong. The carburetors had jets that would clog if you even thought about ethanol fuel. Impressive, considering ethanol wasn't common in marine fuel until decades later. Chrysler wisely exited the marine business in 1984, selling everything to Mercury, who turned it into force. It was like passing a cursed artifact to your enemy, except Mercury did it to themselves. When Mercury introduced the Optimax direct injection two-stroke in 1996, it was supposed to be their answer to Yamaha's HPDI and Evinrude's Ficht. Instead, it became another chapter in why direct injection and marine engines shouldn't date. The early Optimax had a fuel system more complex than the Space Shuttle, and about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. The air compressor providing injection pressure would fail regularly, leaving you with an engine that had all the power of an electric trolling motor. The real excitement came from the tracker valve that would stick and cause hydraulic lock. Pistons would try to compress incompressible fuel, resulting in bent rods, cracked blocks, and repair bills that could fund a small country's defense budget. Mercury spent years and millions fixing the Optimax, and later versions were actually quite good, but those early models from 1996 to 2001, they're the reason marine mechanics drive boats nicer than yours. Being first to market isn't always worth it. Johnson's GT and V-Series engines from the late 1980s and early 1990s were marketed as high-performance motors for the discerning boater. What they actually were was proof that Johnson's engineering department had discovered some really good drugs. These engines featured a revolutionary powerhead design that revolutionized how quickly an engine could destroy itself. The exhaust passages were designed so carbon buildup was inevitable. This carbon would eventually break free and score cylinders, destroy rings, and turn your engine's internals into a war zone. The V6 models had a special feature. The shift rod would corrode and snap without warning. You'd go to shift into reverse to avoid the dock, and nothing would happen, except the sickening crunch of fiberglass meeting wood. Forum posts describe owners carrying spare shift rods like spare fuses. Production ended in the mid-1990s, when Johnson finally admitted that engines should last longer than a season without complete rebuilds. Revolutionary doesn't always mean good. Tohatsu's TLDDI, two-stroke low-pressure direct injection engines from the early 2000s, are the forgotten disaster of the marine world. While everyone remembers the Ficht fiasco, Tohatsu quietly produced their own version of direct injection doom. The TLDDI system used low-pressure fuel injection that was supposed to be simpler than competitors' high-pressure systems. What it actually was a masterclass in making an engine that would run perfectly for exactly 100 hours before giving up on life. The fuel injectors would clog constantly, but cleaning them required special tools costing more than most cars. The ECU would develop amnesia and forget all its programming, leaving you with an engine that thought it was a different horsepower, year, and possibly species. But the crown jewel was the oil injection system that would occasionally stop injecting oil. The engine would continue running normally until it seized solid, usually when crossing shipping channels or outrunning storms. Tohatsu quietly discontinued the TLDDI around 2008. We're halfway through our countdown of marine mechanical monsters, and if you're thinking, surely it can't get worse, oh boy do I have news for you. But first, if you're finding value in this deep dive into boating's dark history, smash that like button and leave a comment below with your own engine horror story. Yamaha's HPDI, high-pressure direct injection system introduced in 2000, was their entry into the two-stroke direct injection wars. While not as catastrophically bad as the Ficht, the first-generation HPDI engines had their own expensive problems. The high-pressure fuel pump was clearly designed by someone who'd never encountered salt water. It would corrode internally, sending metal shavings throughout the fuel system like glitter at a craft store explosion. Replacing the entire fuel system cost roughly the same as a nice used car. The oxygen sensor had the life expectancy of a fruit fly in a freezer. When it failed, which was often, the engine would run so rich it would foul plugs faster than you could replace them. Owners reported going through spark plugs like coffee filters. The belt-driven high-pressure pump would occasionally lunch itself, sending rubber debris throughout the engine. One owner on The Whole Truth described his HPDI as running great until it ate itself from the inside out. Mercury's Verado supercharged 4-stroke, introduced in 2005, was supposed to be the ultimate in smooth, powerful marine propulsion, with a supercharger providing boost and advanced sound dampening, making it whisper quiet. What could go wrong? The supercharger, as it turned out. Early Verados had superchargers that failed with the reliability of a political promise. When bearings went, metal shavings got distributed throughout the engine like seasoning on an expensive meal. But the real problem was the flywheel. Early models had flywheels that would crack and occasionally separate. When a flywheel leaves at 6,000 RPM, it doesn't go quietly. It goes through the cowling, sometimes through the deck, and in one documented case, into the boat behind at the marina. The power steering was designed during opposite day at Mercury Engineering. It would work perfectly until locking up at full throttle, sending boats into spectacular 360-degree spins. Mercury fixed most issues by 2007, but those early Verados are why mechanics drive nicer trucks than you. Suzuki's DF-140 4-stroke seemed like a reliable choice when introduced in the early 2000s. It was fuel efficient, relatively quiet, and had that Japanese reliability reputation. What it also had was an exhaust system that corroded faster than iron in battery acid. The exhaust passages in the engine block would corrode through, allowing water to enter the cylinders. This wasn't gradual performance decline. No, this was running fine on Friday, hydro-locked on Saturday. The real kicker was discovery after warranty expired. The fix required essentially replacing the entire powerhead. Owners reported repair costs exceeding $8,000 on an engine that retailed for $10,000. It was like buying a car, then having to replace everything except the tires. Suzuki eventually addressed the issues with improved corrosion resistance, but not before creating a generation of bitter former owners who still twitch when they see a DF-140. Sometimes that Japanese reliability reputation doesn't translate to marine environments where salt water is liquid destruction. Since we've covered the magnificent disasters of the outboard world, let's venture into infamous inboard-outboard systems. The OMC Cobra sterndrive, produced from 1986 to 1993, was OMC's attempt to compete with Mercury's Alpha drive. What they created was a system that destroyed shift cables faster than a puppy with a shoe collection. The Cobra used a unique shift system, putting incredible stress on shift cables. These cables would stretch, fray, and snap so regularly that owners started carrying spares like jumper cables. When a shift cable failed at the worst possible moment, you'd be stuck in whatever gear you were in last, hopefully not reverse. The real engineering marvel was the bellows design. The two-piece bellows would fail and flood the boat with such reliability that marine surveyors could set their watches by it. 3 years, almost to the day, those bellows would split. The clutch dog and gears were made from compressed chalk. Wearing out so fast, rebuild kits became regular maintenance. The Volvo Penta 290 drive, produced from the late 1980s to mid-1990s, was Volvo's idea of innovation. They created a drive so complex, with so many proprietary parts, that when something broke, and things always broke, you were completely at the mercy of Volvo dealers. The 290 had a unique cone clutch system supposed to provide smoother shifting. What it provided was a mechanism that wore out faster than Formula One brake pads and cost about as much to replace. The special tool required just to remove the drive cost more than most people's first cars. The signature problem was exhaust bellows that would crack and allow exhaust gases into the engine compartment. Nothing says fun day on the water like carbon monoxide poisoning. Several boats caught fire when these gases found an ignition source. Parts availability became such an issue that there's an entire cottage industry converting 290 drives to other systems. When the fix for your product is replacing it with your competitors, you've created something special. Before Mercury figured out the Alpha 1 design with Generation 2, the Generation 1 Alpha 1 drives from the 1970s and early 1980s had spectacular failure modes that kept marine mechanics' children in private schools. The upper gear housing was evidently cast from recycled aluminium cans and good intentions. It would crack around the upper bearing carrier so regularly that checking for cracks became part of the pre-launch ritual, right after checking the drain plug. The shift system used a complex arrangement of cables, pivots, and prayers that would go out of adjustment if you looked at it wrong. When it went out of adjustment, which was constantly, you'd experience grinding gears that sounded like feeding a coffee grinder full of marbles. The real excitement came from the coupler connecting engine to drive. This rubber dampener would deteriorate and fail, but not obviously. Instead, it would slip just enough to cause vibration, wear out U-joints, and make your boat feel powered by an unbalanced washing machine. Mercury's inline 6-cylinder two-strokes from the 1970s and 1980s earned the nickname Tower of Power for their impressive height and theoretical performance. What they actually became was the Tower of Problems, with a reputation for self-destruction that was legendary even by Mercury standards. These engines had a party piece. The cylinder blocks would crack between cylinders with such regularity that mechanics could predict it down to the hour. The cooling system was apparently designed by someone who thought hot spots were a desirable feature. The result was spectacular overheating that would warp heads and crack blocks faster than you could say warranty claim. The ignition system used a distributor cap that had the water resistance of a sponge. One good wave over the transom and you'd lose spark to random cylinders, creating a symphony of misfires that sounded like popcorn in a microwave. Mercury quietly phased out these by the mid-1980s, replacing them with the more reliable V6 designs. Chrysler didn't just make terrible outboards. They also produced inboard marine engines that were so unreliable they made their outboards look good by comparison. These engines, based on automotive designs but marinized, and I use that term loosely, were installed in boats from the 1960s through early 1980s. The marinization process evidently consisted of painting the engine blue and hoping for the best. The cooling passages would clog with rust and scale faster than you could say overheat, and the head gaskets had the sealing capability of a screen door on a submarine. The Chrysler 318 marine engine had this delightful feature where exhaust manifolds would crack and leak water into cylinders. You'd start your engine after a week at the dock and hydro-lock it immediately. The sound of a connecting rod trying to compress water is something you never forget. It's like the engine applauding its own destruction. These engines proved that taking a car engine and putting it in a boat requires more than adding a water pump. So there you have it, 15 engines that earn their place in the Marine Hall of Shame. These mechanical disasters taught manufacturers exactly what not to do, making today's engines infinitely more reliable. If you survived this countdown without PTSD flashbacks, congratulations. Drop a comment with your own engine horror stories. Did we miss any legendary failures? Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more content. Until next time, keep your shift cables intact and your insurance paid. Remember, smooth seas never made skilled sailors, but these engines sure made mechanics wealthy.